Well, not everybody's come up from dinner yet, but thought we'd start to roll a little bit, and welcome and thanks to all of you who came. For any of you who still don't know who I am, my name is John Judge, and I'm pretty much the de facto executive director of the Coalition on Political Assassinations, which has been doing these regional meetings since the mid-90s. This is actually, I think I calculated, this is our 12th or 13th year, but 94, yeah. So Peter's doing the math over here for me. So, but we've also held regional meetings in Memphis and in Los Angeles. Plan to do that again in 2008 on the upcoming, and that'll be an anniversary for all three assassinations. I was talking about the possibility of doing a regional meeting in New York City, somewhere near the old Audubon, and focusing on Malcolm X's assassination, and thought that might bring a different crowd. So, we don't have as large a turnout this year as we usually do at these events, but there's still always people interested in people that come to Dallas anyway. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you're in need of a bathroom, I found one by going out to the left and then making a right and going down to the end of the hall and making another little right, and you'll see a men's room and a women's room there. And you can either register for the whole conference tonight or pay a day rate for the different events, and you save $5 for doing the whole thing. We are going to, some of us stay around till Wednesday, till the 22nd, to do the moment of silence on the grassy knoll at 12:30. But the bulk of the conference will be tonight and Saturday and half a day on Sunday. And after we finish tonight, there's a shuttle available back to the Hotel Lawrence, and sometime around 10 o'clock we want Randy Benson, a award-winning filmmaker who's doing a documentary called The Seekers about the research community, to show us some excerpts from his work in progress. And he's hoping next year, if we do the COPA meeting, to come and see if we can do a showing of the finished film at the Texas theater where Oswald was arrested, because I suggested that might be an appropriate place for us to show it. So we'll see, but that's been in progress to reopen for a while. And then on Saturday from 9 in the morning till noon, at the Hotel Lawrence on the second floor rear, and again from 2 to 5 we'll have speakers. The morning will be about archiving materials in the cases, and the afternoon will be new research material and information. And then at 8 o'clock we have a sort of we raise hands to see who wants to see what DVD or CD about, or a VHS about, what topic. But I brought a whole plethora. I even brought some things that are speeches by some of the people who canceled this year. So if you came to see somebody, I might still let you see them on the screen. But I had some last-minute cancellations to the people, which always happens every year. And unfortunately, the major one for me, because I've been planning it for a year and was due to a last-minute illness, partially from food poisoning, is that Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney was not able to attend, and who wanted to be here and is certainly a great friend of the research community and our work. She changed her thesis of her doctoral thesis topic to political assassinations after she met me, and she's been working in that direction. And she was very supportive of the various versions of the Martin Luther King Records Act that we'll talk about, that we got introduced into Congress this last time. Didn't get passed, but it made some momentum, and can come back again. And somebody who I'm sure, even though she lost her primary and won't be in Congress in the coming term, will be visible to you and doing other things that are of interest. One of the projects that she's very much supportive of is idea that I've had for some time to create a museum and research center in D.C. based on a combination of the political assassinations, real history, and alternate and hidden history of the United States, where young people could come and see a different point of view and different information, and also a research center there where they could work. So failing in that, I was fortunate enough to have invited and gotten Peter Del Scott to come this year, and so he's going to provide an extemporaneous, last-minute, unwritten and unrefined, but I'm sure informative as always, keynote speech for us tonight. And then we're also presenting one of our Sylvia Marr Lifetime Achievement Awards this evening. I brought some pictures along, and they're of different things, but our topic this time is acts of state, assassination as a tool of politics. And I was trying to get a wide range. Like I invited a young guy, Eric Giblin, who had approached Cynthia's office from the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Foundation, who was working on a case of assassination death squad down in Guatemala, and they had actually uncovered the entire plot and uncovered the fact that the security arrangements for the people who were being targeted had been handed over to this death squad by the American embassy people that were supposed to be protecting them. This is current. This is in the last 2 years. And these are two women that were targeted who had won international peace prizes for the conciliatory work they had done down there, but the government was opposing them and the pro-labor stances that they were taking. So I thought it would, this was called Operation Dragon because the military intelligence, retired military intelligence colonel that was heading it up like Bruce Lee, so he named the Operation Dragon. But they actually have a separate unit in the Justice Department there that went out and raided this person's house and got extensive documents that we were following up on FOIA to get more about it when the foundation itself became defunded. But just to give you a sense, and maybe, sorry, in the back you can't see this exactly, but this is a magazine called Jane's Defense Weekly. It's a regular report about different issues, mostly with weapon systems and that sort of thing. And of course the weapon manufacturers take ads. So the back of this is an ad for something called, it's from Lockheed Martin, rather major defense contractor, and this particular thing is Sniper ATP. And the subtext reads, because the targets are getting smaller and the stakes are getting bigger. And so what they show you is this aerial photo, and I'm sure you can't see this exactly, of all these buildings, and then they have a highlighted area, which is what the drone or the Predator that this ATP is Sniper highlights, and they blew it up a little bit, and its cars traveling on a road is in the target zone, but it's not military jeeps or tanks or anything, it's just an automobile. So yeah, so this is they're advertising an assassination tool. That they can target now down to the individual car with their drone operations. So I thought that was kind of a picture of the week when I was coming. And then Dan Alcorn provided a really interesting photo that he got off the net. He's done JFK research for some time. And this is from the 7th Bombardment Wing Operations, Carswell Air Force Base, 1949 to 1951, at an annual air inspection at the base from the 7th to the 18th of November in 1949. And there's a little picture here of the people that attended this event. And among those people, interestingly enough, I thought, were not only Stuart Symington, who said that the B-38 was still the best bomber we have, but in addition to that, in the picture is Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson, Senator Richard Russell of Georgia, Mr. Amon Carter, and Mr. D. Harold Byrd, D.H. Byrd, who, among other things, owned the Texas School Book Depository. And another person present in the photo is Curtis LeMay, head of the Strategic Air Command. So this is a kind of amazing picture of everybody sort of all together in 1949, not that many years before they come together for another operation and its subsequent cover-ups. And somebody brought me this, and I don't know whether to put it out or pass it around, but this is a picture from the grassy knoll. I think this is from Ben Rogers that asked me, but it's either Ben or Chris Pike. And it's a bunch of the researchers, but outside of me, you can always tell because I have this huge beard and in those days, but they wanted to know if people recognized the researchers in this photo. So I could either pass it, but I don't know what to do because then you can't write on the photo, but maybe we could stick it on a piece of paper, and have it up during the things. But it's from the Penn Jones collection, but I think they're trying to identify who was there, and I myself don't recognize all of them. They're too young in the picture, I think. But it was at an earlier time. So that's a little bit of my photo gallery. Of course, I'm sure you've all seen the photo where Jack White has now solved the Kennedy assassination. It was Mary Moorman that did it, and he proved it because she changed her socks before she got shot. So, at least I think that's what it means. When I started working in the halls of Congress, and I told my friends that times are so bad, the anarchists are working in the halls of Congress. But it was quite interesting because in each building, the Rayburn and the Longworth and the Cannon, they have photo exhibits about how the buildings were put together. And so they'll go from, the startup of the laying the groundwork and then the building in different points. And I had to walk through the Rayburn every day through this sort of long gallery of pictures. And right in the middle was this one, and I called the house architect, and I was able to get it says AD 1962 on it. And it's President Kennedy laying the foundation stone on the Rayburn building in 1962. But it was a nice picture, I thought, of JFK. And one that's probably not out much, but it hangs in a much larger picture there in the hallway in the Rayburn offices. I like to see pictures in hallways. Many of you probably know about the picture that I think is of Jack Ruby standing behind Mr. Eisenhower in the tunnel over to the the restaurant there when he's campaigning in the 1950s. But it's been quite an education and quite interesting to go up into Congress, which is, except for their BlackBerries, pretty much in about the 19th century. In terms of how they do anything. I mean, nothing's simple. You have to file things like, how many spaces apart on how long and what they'll deal with to print or reprint and what they'll take and what they won't. So it's a pretty thick bureaucracy up there. But I just approached it as trying to do grassroots organizing like I do anyway among the aides and the people at the staff that work for these Congress members, because I didn't figure I'd have much access to the members themselves, although I got a little. And I'd plant a seed wherever I could, but I worked mostly among the staff of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus and anybody else that I could find. And so when we started with the introduction of the Martin Luther King Records Act for the release of the files on the life and death of Dr. King, Cynthia told me, you won't get any sponsors. But I kept working, and I kept calling, and I kept going back. And so by the end, we had 67 sponsors in the House for the bill, which is more than a lot of other bills got at all. And it also means that even though Cynthia won't be there next year, we've got 67 other people that we can start pressing to reintroduce the bill. In addition to that, a companion bill with no change was introduced on the Senate side by John Kerry. And it got one co-sponsor, Hillary Clinton. But I think doors are opening. The thing that really held the bill up, because we also got endorsements from individual people that were part of King's entourage or part of the investigations. And Bob Edgar, the General Secretary of the National Council of Christian Churches, was also a member of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, endorsed the bill for release. And Representative John Lewis, well-known associate of Dr. King and civil rights activist. I asked Representative Lewis Stokes to recommend it. He's also, interestingly enough, the chairman of the board of the National Spy Museum now. And Stokes was the one that locked the records up in the first place under the House rule. So his secretary got back to me and said that Stokes didn't think it was appropriate for him as the head of the House Select Committee on Assassinations to call for the release of the records. So in honor of that, I quoted him from Ebony magazine saying, I think it's important if we're to allay all the fears and concerns that the American people have about these assassinations to release all of the files and records The simple release of records of the House Select Committee on Assassinations will not stop the rumors and theories. The CIA files, FBI files, and Secret Service files should be released so that there are no questions about anything, particularly since allegations are that the CIA, FBI, and Secret Service were all involved in the assassination of the president. But he was calling for release in the past. Judge Joe Brown in Memphis, the last judge in James O'Reilly's case, endorsed, and William F. Pepper, the lawyer, Dick Gregory, the civil rights activist. I got Beverly Robertson, the chair of the National Civil Rights Museum, and we introduced the bill, and CNN covered the introduction of the bill. And so when we went to visit the Civil Rights Museum, Cynthia and I and some others, they came out and were all excited about the bill having been passed. They didn't realize that the bill will force the release of the rifle that we've been wanting to test for some time, that they have sealed up in this exhibit. Ife Williams, the National Chair of the National Congress of Black Women, Professor Johnson Salisbury from the April 4th Foundation in Memphis, the Executive Secretary Joe Volk of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, the National Board of Directors of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Anna Berger, the Secretary-Treasurer of the Service Employees International Union, Bill Medford, the Director of Civil and Human Rights, General Board of Church and Society, United Methodist Church, William Sinkford, Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and other civil rights leaders. So we've got public backing. We were asking these organizations not only to send us an endorsement, but also to get in touch with their membership and tell them to support the bill. And so it had quite a bit of momentum, and where it hit the roadblock was with the death of Coretta Scott King. I had arranged a panel at the Congressional Black Caucus in 2001 that was canceled because it was for September the 13th. And other things were going on that day. That's why they did it, was to cancel this panel. And so we did it the next year, and Martin Luther King III was there, and I told him about the bill, and he said that he would endorse it at that time. And then Coretta Scott King passed on, as you may know, within the last year, King's wife. And I thought, well, that will be the end of this blockage or argument that was sometimes made in the civil rights community, that they were afraid to release all the files on Dr. King because there might be dirt in them. I said, you first of all consider the source of the dirt and the paid informants and who they were working for and who wanted the dirt and who spread or invented the dirt, but also King has his reputation with or without those people and whatever they say. And if it turns out that King was a human being, well, all the better. It means that all the more reason that we should feel impelled to follow his example. And so I thought that, the last remnant of that would perhaps have passed with Coretta Scott King's passing, because I thought that the family, might have, out of respect to the mother, not wanted some of that to come back into the press about King having affairs or whatever it was. But instead, the children, I guess, in their grief, went the other way and didn't want the files released. And so we were trying near the end to come up with some sort of a compromise. Kerry was ready to go down to Memphis and have a press conference with Cynthia McKinney and introduce the bill, but it stalled out. But I don't think it's hopeless, and I think that we can, we already had the King family listed as on the advisory board in the bill. We could make a provision that they be one of the board members. We could also make a limited privacy provision that if the material only talks about King's personal life and nothing else, nothing political, that it could be excised, at least until, these files are supposed to be released under the House Select Committee deal anyway by 2028, but we would have gotten them out under this bill within 4 years of its passage. And another advantage of being in the Congress was that I started getting all of these reports and materials and anything I wanted, basically, like every day was Christmas. If I heard about a CIA Inspector General report, I just called them up, and I'm at Cynthia McKinney's office, and over the stuff would run, and do you want a DVD or VHS, and so it was a real boon for me to have access to so much information, including stuff from the Congressional Research Service. It does a lot of good work, and you may not be aware of a report, April 5th, 2006, this year, report to Congress on direct assaults against presidents, presidents-elect, and candidates by Frederick Kaiser, a specialist in American national government And this is just basically reporting, but it says direct assaults against those people and the candidates have occurred on 15 separate occasions, with 5 resulting in death, 10 incumbent, about 24% of the 42 individuals serving in the office, including 4 of the past 6 presidents, have been victims or targets. 4 of the 10 died as a result of the attacks, and it identifies the incidents and provides information about what happened, where, why, and it'll be updated through time. So this is a CRS report. If anybody wants to get the number from me, they can talk about it. It's a report on ongoing attacks. And of course, we had some important deaths this year, one of which sadly is our friend and one of our co-founders of COPA, Professor Phil Melanson, who did groundbreaking work on all 3 of the assassinations, and former Texas First Lady Nellie Connolly passed on when she was, of course, the last hope, I think, to get a reinterment of the body of John Connolly so that the final metal fragments could be taken and checked against the official story or weighed or whatever. So, and some of the history, of course, and the experience dies with her. There were some interesting things that happened around political assassinations, and one would that they would happen here. The Speaker of the House put a message to the President saying, notice that they had issued an executive order blocking property of persons in connection with the terrorist attack in Beirut, Lebanon, February 14, 2005, that resulted in the assassination of the former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri and the deaths of others, other bombings, assassination attempts, and related to Hariri's death. And so this affects anybody that is potentially involved in the government. They're freezing assets. That'd be an interesting thing to do, wouldn't it? The United States has said that there's mounting evidence that Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah are planning to topple the Lebanese government, and they're calling for international tribunals to investigate the assassination. This is what they do in other countries, or they want other countries to do, but not here at home. And then, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a new movie out that's like a sort of a docudrama that depicts an assassination on George Bush in 2007, I think it is. And they go through this entire sort of plot. It's kind of like if an after-event special that somebody's put together, maybe a year afterwards is what it's framed as. And they have the talking heads of people involved and the FBI guy in the lab that had doubts about it and these other things. But they come up with an immediate suspect, but it's the wrong person, and then they eventually get another suspect. They're both lone nuts. I mean, although one isn't so lone because the first one is supposed to be tied to Al-Qaeda. And then it leads to more repressive legislation. But the details I found interesting because the details in some of the scenes were verbatim reporting from the details of the Reagan assassination, including a guy standing in the rain with this pork pie hat saying that the Secret Service had come into the emergency room and told everybody to get the hell out of here. And I actually cleaned up the quote by saying it that way. But that did happen, and but it also has the wound that's fatal. It says that he was shot under the shoulder blade, but then the solution to the assassin is a guy on the 41st floor of a building. So unless he was lying on the ground with his arm up, I don't know how they shot him in the shoulder blade, underneath the arm, in the armpit, but that's where they got Reagan when they shot. So the details don't mix with their story, but they're taken in large part from the details of Reagan. And work continues on other political assassinations. Paul Wellstone, we may have some discussion with John Hankey, who did some work about that case, and there are new books out about it. And Tom Blackwell sent me something about a new museum here that's going to offer up Dallas police history. I saw there's a police museum in Memphis. It was kind of a weird concept to me. I was walking along and it said police museum, and I thought, like, maybe there'll be a time in the future when there'll be museums about when there were police, and you'll take your kids and they'll say, what were they for, Daddy? But what did they do? They carried sticks and guns and they beat people. But apparently we'll have one here, and to what extent it'll get into the events, I don't know, but it's interesting they're doing it. But there's a number of people, if you talk about assassinations, it's not only those in office or running for office, but people that are killed for political reasons, I think, should also qualify as political assassinations. There was a string of 400 political assassinations from 1928 to 1932 in the Weimar Republic. The leading musicians, the most outspoken labor leaders and organizers, the most radical voices, the academicians who were, were teaching an alternate history, and people, many voices that could have stood perhaps effectively against the rise of Hitler and the fascism, were systematically being murdered. And the Weimar Republic said that they knew they were politically motivated, but they couldn't solve them, and they didn't know who was doing them. And the most likely historical suspect is a group called the Freikorps, who were disaffected veterans that took up the line that they'd been stabbed in the back by the politicians at home, and it was out of the Freikorps that the early brown shirts and the SA and SS gangs were related. But the report here is an example. William Bradley Rowland, also known as Brad Will, a U.S. journalist in Cameron, was shot and killed in Oaxaca, Mexico, by paramilitaries affiliated with the PRI, the former ruling party. He was covering the continued resistance of teachers and other workers against the PRI-controlled government in the state of Oaxaca. And many journalists are being killed around the world who are covering controversial things or in the wrong place at the wrong time. And of course, in our work, we know of witnesses that are killed afterwards in these assassinations. One of the things that we're going to do on Sunday, we'll also have some additional factual presentation in the morning, and then we're going to try and talk about the future COPA, such as it is, and about the museum idea. But afterwards, if people are interested and I need you to let me know, I made a reservation for 10 people at the Antares restaurant, which is a restaurant up at the top of the Needle, and it turns as it goes, but it's a fixed price. It's a $31 brunch if people are interested in coming out to brunch on Sunday afterwards. I'll try to let them know if we've got enough to make the 10. And then on Monday, we want to take a trip down to Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Ben Rogers from there will be speaking, and there's a Penn Jones collection, one of the early researchers that we've honored for COPA, with a lot of interesting stuff and new material is down there as well, so we want to go and see that. One person I invited who at the last minute was unable to come, along with his publisher, Sandra Hicks, is Brad Ayers, who's written some new book called The Zenith Secret about CIA involvement in the Kennedy assassination. It's about out, but I haven't seen the whole of the thesis, and unfortunately he wasn't able to come. But there are additional books looming. I also found out, again from Tom Blackwell, who's local and does a lot of good work informing people about Dallas, that there's a John F. Kennedy Memorial Walk for Justice that's walking across the state that's done by a judge, Bill Moody here, and it's going to, on Saturday, it's going to come through to the area around where the memorial is, I think. So I was going to try and see if we can catch up with it, or maybe march with it or something, but that's sometime around 12:30 or 12 o'clock that it's going to come through on the 22nd. I'm sorry, not on Saturday, on the 22nd. And one interesting thing I just found out, because I was tracking some other stuff, but you may know that Donald Rumsfeld is now going to be replaced as Secretary of Defense by, of all people, Robert Gates, the former director of the CIA. And the importance of that for us is that Robert Gates was in charge of the CIA during the Assassination Record Review Board period. It was Gates who oversaw the release of the files, such as they were, the pre-release, the segregated files, and whatever other files we got. And there's many questions still among researchers who followed it closely whether the CIA has ever released the full record on Oswald, the 201 file, and other elements in there, and files that are referred to that we don't have, and files that were, what year did they start on Oswald? Was it 58 when he said he was going to tell secrets to the Russians, or was it 60? And but what I found out is that George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41, the father, signed a signing statement. He had a signing statement to the John F. Kennedy Records Act, like the current Bush is doing hundreds of signing statements. And it basically asserted his right to refuse the release of any records that he thought were going to affect national security as a preeminent right of the president above all the provisions of the Act for release, and that these could be affected, these stoppages could be affected in secret, so that he would be able to go to the agencies and tell them not to release the files, but we would never know. So if Gates is going to come up for these confirmation hearings on December the 4th, someone ought to ask him if, in fact, that prerogative was used by George H.W. Bush and, during the time. Peter's saying he thinks it was. So, but I think that that's a pertinent question to be asking some of these people. One of the people that also came out on the Knoll with us very regularly, going all the way back to when Penn used to come out on the Knoll, is Pedro Medrano, and they're now posthumously naming a post office here in Texas after him. He was a labor activist. He worked with Cesar Chavez. He used to come out on the Knoll. I don't know if you may talk to them, but he carried a sign, an RFK campaign sign, and had RFK's blood on the sign. He had been in the pantry at the time and got blood splatter on the sign, and he used to come out every year, even when there were 5 or 6 of us, and bring this sign along. And there's also a conference going on this weekend in Minneapolis, St. Paul, run by the Catholic Church in the St. Paul Cathedral. And it was in part because one of the, I think his name is Arne Carlson, a former governor of the state, has always been fascinated with the Kennedy assassination, the impact it had on the public. In addition, an artist there had spent, I think it's 10 years, creating this painting that's a depiction of Jackie holding JFK in her lap, done as a Pieta of the Virgin Mary holding the Christ. And so but he couldn't get it displayed anywhere in the museums there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but now the Vatican has bought it, and they're going to display it at the Vatican, and so they're having this big conference with the Marine Guard, of all people, overseeing the unveiling of this photo. But among the people speaking at the conference, and I have some people who weren't able to come from there, Lyndon, who's talked here before on the Martin Luther King assassination, and Marty Bragg, and so there's other folks there that are going to go to this. But one of the people speaking is John Tunheim, and he's going to talk about the ARRB and the release. I encouraged him for years to write a book about the review board and the experiences of the review board, and maybe do it. But there's also another book coming out from Paris Flamand, The Assassination of America, and it's quite extensive, so he was hoping to get it out by this, but I don't think he has it out quite yet. Another CRS report is on the stock market response to dramatic historical events, and they have Pearl Harbor and the JFK assassination. But there was quite a stock fall after JFK, and there were people also who bought ahead and cashed in on it. And Penn Jones followed some of that. Here I've got a call, House Resolution 740, calling for the government of the United Kingdom to immediately establish a full, independent public judicial inquiry into the murder of Northern Ireland defense attorney Pat Finucane, as recommended by an international judge, Peter Corey, as part of the Weston Park Agreement and a way forward for Northern Ireland peace process. So again, we call for investigations abroad. Cynthia introduced a bill to reopen an investigation into the death of a environmental activist in Nigeria that was killed, Ken Saro-Wiwa. Didn't get any action, but moved on it. And another movie that came out this year was on John Lennon, U.S. versus John Lennon, and they do a really great job going through each period and what his politics were and what he was doing, and why the system was responding to him, and when they tried to extradite him. But then they say that after he won the extradition suit, and his son was born, it was his birthday, and he won the suit all on the same day, and then all those problems went away, and Reagan was elected, so the system wasn't worried about him anymore. And then the movie ends with him having this sort of idyllic period, raising the child with Yoko, and then the screen blackens, and there's a couple of shots, and then they say, well, Lennon will live on. They don't put it in the context that he had started back into political activity. He was supporting labor abroad. He was a guy that could have brought 1 million people into the street against the war and the military buildup of Reagan. They just depoliticized the ending so that it seems that some unemployed guy just decided to come and shoot him, and doesn't really make sense. Another person that I invited this weekend was one of the people working on the Malcolm X Museum, and they said they'd send someone, but I never heard back, so I guess they're not coming. But they're making the Audubon into a museum and to follow that assassination up there. And then the other day, I had a chance to go to the groundbreaking for the Martin Luther King Memorial out on the National Mall. And it was a fairly big to-do event. But in the groundbreaking ceremony, Jesse Jackson spoke about the last period when they were meeting with King for the last time, and he was making parallels to Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane and, you know, taking the bitter cup and all these different things. And then Andy Young, who was standing there, said, well, I was at that last meeting too, and one of the things that Dr. King said to us is, you guys have left me standing out here alone, and you're going to have to do your part. And right at that point, Andy Young broke down in tears, and then Jackson started crying as well. But in my view, both of them have something more to cry about than just not having followed through. I'm also getting in the mail the Jonestown report, and it's also online. You can look it up, but they have a forum on whether it was murder or suicide. But it seems to be based on just speculation or opinion about whether people would or could or did kill themselves, rather than going to the evidence from the grand jury that they were all murdered, that Dr. Mutu developed. So things develop apace, and in order to introduce Peter Dale Scott, I'll read you something, a serendipity that I found in a book called, I don't know if you know this book, Peter, The Book of Assassins. And it's called, oh, you do? Okay. A biographical dictionary from ancient times to the present. And it says, you know, how many people know who shot Archduke Ferdinand? Because assassins often create problems, you know, and led to World War I. Gabriela Princips, but they have a lot. And I tried to look at the modern assassinations, and they're pretty much mainstream sources. But he tries to take an academic approach, and he has a little section in the introduction where you know, he talks about people with conspiracy theories. He says that he and you follow the standard of the guy that wrote Paranoid Thinking in American Politics, Richard Hofstadter, yeah. But I don't know if you agreed with that. But you know, it was interesting just that he was talking about these different people, and he said, the literature of assassination is rife, particularly in North America, with publications on the vernacular or folk tradition. The field is one in which cranks, crackpots, eccentrics, any of you here, and obsessive amateur investigators have felt free to indulge their pet theories. Occasionally, one does find among such books a work of private sector scholarship at its most worthwhile, but these are comparatively few. They are also distinct from the works of professional scholars, such as Peter Dale Scott, one of the most significant experts on conspiracy theories, and the author in particular of Deep Politics and the Death of JFK, Berkeley, 93, probably the most profound work on the environment in which the Kennedy assassination took place. Scott labors in a tradition that finds its inspiration in classic texts such as The Paranoid Style in American Politics and other essays by Richard Hofstadter, who you know that he's friends with Zelikow and Ernst LeMay and others, and they refer to working with him. New York 65, and has been carried on more recently by a member of a number of others, such as the 70s New Culture on Surveillance, Stephen Paul Miller, Empire of Conspiracy, The Culture of Paranoia in Post-War America by Timothy Melley, etc. But I think he gets the first part right, and gives kudos to someone that we have already, COPA has honored with as much as we can. He honors us more with the Sylvia Marr Award, and we're glad to have him here and to fill in at least briefly for our missing keynote speaker. And he was going to introduce her, so maybe he wants to say a few words about that as well, was Peter Dale Scott.
Thank you very much, John. I learned a great deal in the last few minutes, including that I had a connection to Hofstadter, which I was not aware. I'm here because partly one of the reasons I came to Dallas this year, it's my first year in COPA since 2001, and I should perhaps begin with an apology. The reason why I didn't come in 2002, 3, and 4 was because I was in Thailand. I went to Thailand for half of the years, and November is the best month to be in Thailand. By March, it's too hot. So the half of the year I was in Thailand blotted me out for the COPA conferences. But COPA is very dear to my heart. I think it's very important. I think it's particularly important right now, and as John is right, I mean, compared to the huge crowds we've had in the past, this is a small gathering, but it's probably about the same size as the first ever commemorative conference that I'm aware of, which was Bud Fensterwald's 10th year anniversary in 1973, roughly this size, and it was the beginning, of course, something was going to grow and then shrink and then grow again. And I'm quite satisfied that this kind of field will grow again, particularly if we have in our sights not only JFK, but also 9/11, which I will be speaking about together tomorrow. I see it as very worthwhile to see the two in a common context. And of course, in the year 2009, if all goes on January 9th, 2009, they will open finally the records of the 9/11 Commission. The big difference between the Warren Commission and the 9/11 Commission, they both endorsed what they were supposed to endorse, but the Warren Commission at least had the decency to release their exhibits at the same time and put their documents into the archive. And for some reason, the 9/11 Commission chose to delay these until after the 2008 election. And we will find out in 2009, if all goes according to schedule, whether there was a good reason to delay the release of these exhibits or not. But whatever happens, I predict that there is a kind of ebb and flow to the interest in alternative history and the kind of meta events that don't get reported properly in the New York Times. And I predict with some confidence that these conferences will grow in size in the future, and it will be very valuable to have had this continuity that some people were here in this particular year. Now, John is right that I'm now here at this podium because I asked him, I said, I assumed that John would want to take the honor, as I see it, of introducing Cynthia primarily for himself, because he's worked so closely with her and so productively with her for the last couple of years. But I wanted to say something about Cynthia as well, and I can still say it even though she's not here. I think it's in my book, Cocaine Politics, that I commented on what we might call the Wayne Morse syndrome, that every now and then we have Congress people in the Senate or in the House who take outstanding positions of courage, and they all pay the same penalty. Wayne Morse and Senator Gruening from Alaska were the two votes cast against what was one of the most outrageous resolutions ever presented to Congress, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, conceived in lies and deceit, a deception planned for months in advance. And out of all those, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, 2 people voted against it. And it's to their everlasting credit that they did. And the immediate consequence was they were both defeated when they stood for re-election. And the same thing happened with Iran-Contra, that I have a whole list of them in Cocaine Politics. Well, I shouldn't forget Senator Church, the first senator to take a serious look at the CIA, and perhaps equally revolutionary idea to look at what multinational corporations were doing to corrupt decent politics around the world. I do have to quote a line from Senator Church. He said, "It is outrageous to think that multinational corporations should dictate the foreign policy of the United States." Well, it was a brave thing to say, and it was a very, people complained at the time, I complained at the time, he didn't go far enough and so on. But he broke new ground, and he paid the Wayne Morse price. A great deal of money came into into the state of Idaho when he stood for re-election. Some of it came from South Africa through the boss. It's another intelligence scandal that rocked South Africa later, that they were spending money to defeat Senator Church, but they did. Here was a man who was once thought of as a serious candidate to be president of the United States, but because he pushed the envelope a little bit outside what most people would do, he was defeated by a very concerted effort for re-election. And then the same thing happened with Iran-Contra, and I could give you other examples, but it has certainly happened with Cynthia McKinney. I only met Cynthia McKinney once, and I have to say, I met Wayne Morse, and I've met in all 5 or 6 people from Congress. I don't know that any has ever impressed me more with their intelligence and commitment and verve and humor than Congresswoman McKinney. As you probably know, she and John together organized a briefing on Capitol Hill in one of the 3 buildings on the subject of 9/11. And I think it was an important event. A lot of it is now on the web. I know that the original plan was for Congresswoman McKinney's office to release a DVD, but a lot of it is already on the web from other sources, and it was on C-SPAN, and people downloaded it from there. I was very proud to be part of that event, and I was very proud of Cynthia McKinney's role in doing it. She actually had somebody else co-sponsoring it, but I don't think she got any co-sponsors outside of the Black Ethnic Caucus.
Grijalva, New Mexico was in co-sponsor.
Yes, and it was supposed to be a briefing for congressional aides, and in one of the breaks, a congressional aide actually came to me and asked me to autograph my book, Deep Politics, for him. And I said, "May happen you do it?" And I said, "Are you here in the briefing?" And he said, "No, I don't think I can dare do that." So you realize just how far out Congresswoman McKinney was in doing this. Well, Congresswoman McKinney, to my knowledge, is the only person to have won the Wayne Morse Award twice, because twice she has been defeated really by her own party, which is something that we have to be concerned about when we obviously have to look to the Democrats to do something about the terrible problem we have in Washington now. But I hope at some point along the line we can do something about the forces within the Democratic Party, that when somebody like Congresswoman McKinney speaks up, those people are targeted for defeat in the Democratic primary, and it has happened twice. And because I have a residue, after all I've seen and heard and so on, I still have a residue of hope for this country. Part of that hope is that we will see Congresswoman McKinney in public activity again, and hopefully in Congress again. And maybe this time the Democratic Party won't rob her of her seniority, as they shamefully did the last time that she was ousted temporarily from Congress. So, the reason we're all here in this room is that despite all, we believe in this country. I mean, if we were in, say, China, or in Stalinist Russia, or even Brezhnevian Russia, there were lots of people who knew what was rotten and what was wrong in their country, but they didn't create a COPA. That was not the way to get ahead in those countries. And we study these things because we believe that we have a system that has room and will tolerate criticism and study. And we expect not to be given a totally fair shake. And I got my FBI file back in 1978. It was 985 pages. And the most interesting parts of it and the most blacked out parts, I can't really tell what they were about, but I know what they were not about, which was the Vietnam War, which was the bulk of it and not essentially censored at all. There was one part that was censored, and I think it was because by 1978 I had become fairly interested in the Kennedy assassination, and it is no secret to people in this room that there are forces in the American government, possibly in this room today and possibly not anymore, certainly used to be in the old days, who follow that kind of criticism very closely. That doesn't matter. This is a country which you can, your phone can be tapped, your mail can be read, it can be intercepted. I've had all these things happen, but I'm here. I've never been hit over the head or anything like that. I've had death threats in the mail. They haven't amounted to anything. Apparently I'm still alive. So it is an act of faith which keeps us going. And it certainly, as I said once before in another conference and got a good laugh, whatever we're doing this for, it's not for the money. And although we've been even accused of that on occasion. So I think it's very important that COPA keep going, keep the flame alight, and it's very important that you people keep coming. And I will have something more concrete to say tomorrow about why I think this is, even the Kennedy assassination is not just a historical topic in 2006, but an ongoing, lively one, just as 9/11 is very obviously a contemporary and ongoing topic. I'm about to step down, but I do want to say a word about Phil Melanson. And it's on my website. If I can just remember what I said on my website, I sent it to somebody and asked it to be forwarded to Mrs. Melanson, and in the end it was published in the local newspaper there. Phil Melanson was a very gentle, very modest person, and a very good scholar. And I'm a former political scientist, and I know how difficult it is for political scientists to deal with people who say that what you read in the New York Times is not necessarily the truth, because essentially political science is a science that functions by believing what you see in the New York Times. So it's potentially very threatening. I myself luckily got fired from a political science department, moved over into an English department where when if I wrote things about medieval Latin poetry, it didn't engage in any way with what I was saying about the Vietnam War or about the Kennedy assassination. Phil lived in the middle of a political science department, and his colleagues regarded him there as my colleagues regarded me in my political science department as a kind of crackpot. But I think in the end, history is going to remember Phil Melanson, and I myself have no knowledge of the other people in the department. Maybe they'll be remembered too, but I have no reason at this point to know why they should be. One thing that he gave to this profession was a sense of decency and meticulous objectivity. And it was never more visible than at a COPA conference when we had a debate between Dan Moldea, who began by being a very solid, decent scholar, but somehow his ship hit the rocks when it came to RFK, debating Phil Melanson. And it was a gentleman dealing with a pit bull. Moldea, I think, disgraced himself in that debate. And Phil Melanson, in a very gentle way, established that solid scholarship and solid objectivity is what will prevail in the long run, which of course is what John Milton said 300 years ago, that the voice of truth is the quiet voice, but it is the voice that ultimately prevails. There have been times in my life when I wondered if perhaps John Milton was wrong and maybe I was wrong, but over the long haul, I have that belief. And one of the great graces of being associated with COPA is meeting people like Phil Melanson, meeting all of you, because it's a very, how shall we say it, I'd rather be meeting people at a place like COPA because I know that we will have something authentically in common. Whereas if I was at a meeting of, say, PR executives or something like that, all competing with each other, they all have a common denominator, but they don't really have a common concern of the heart. And that's what we have here. And I'm very, very grateful to John Judge, who has put so many years and so much hard work into keeping the flame alive, and to all the other researchers who have done their work, and more of them now we talk of in the past tense. But I don't think there's any danger that in the end people will say the man who really understood the Kennedy assassination was Gerald Posner. I think we can be quite confident that that is the losing side in the struggle to establish what really happened. So I'm very glad you're here, and I look forward to what we're about to see. And I want to say once again, thanks to Congresswoman McKinney, who is not here, for what she's done, and thanks to John, who is here, for all that he has done. Thank you very much.
Stirred me on here. Even knocked my chair over, I think. Just two brief things from your comments. One, when you were talking about who will be remembered, you may know the speech that was given by in the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti, by Vanzetti at the end of the trial when they are being convicted. And he says, I want to thank the court. I want to thank the judge. He said, without the court, I would be nothing but a shoe peddler, and my friend here, Sacco, a fish marketer, and he said, but you have made names for us. He said, history will not long remember the name of the judge, and he points to the judge, or the prosecuting attorney in this case. You will die like dogs in the dust of history, but the name Sacco and the name Vanzetti will live on in the hearts of the people. So that was one thing you stirred, and the other was the truth and the power of truth, being able to overcome all of the obstacles through time, like Dr. King said, the arc of the universe bending slowly toward justice, and it being more important to hew to the truth, even if it takes you where others don't go at times, than it is to be expedient or to follow it. And I don't know, some of you may know that I wrote a little hip-hop song. I haven't got all the moves down yet, but I did write the song, and I do it in the high schools, and I call it Satyagraha hip-hop. And before I go on to this, I just thought I'd do it for you. Satyagraha is a Hindu term that Gandhi used to describe the power of truth and the truth force that would overcome the violence. And his nonviolence was not passive, it was active. And it used this force, this discipline, and a force of truth, a spiritual force, to overcome it. So I made that into a little hip-hop song. Now, I know you think you're tough, but you better keep your distance if you're dealing with a brother known as nonviolent resistance. Dr. King, he had more power in his one little finger than whatever you'll let loose pulling on that trigger. You'll be bragging about your juice, dissing everybody, laughing, ha-ha. You won't be smiling wrong when you run into Satyagraha. Now, I really don't think that you're getting the whole picture, but you'll see it soon enough. I have to get nonviolent with you. Violence get back violence every minute, every hour, but that cycle going to end when it run into truth power. So I'd like to ask Pat Sikora's here, who's one of the curators and directors at the Phil Melanson Archive on the Robert Kennedy assassination at University of Dartmouth in Massachusetts. And I'd like to ask her, and also a close friend of Larry Teeter, who wrote Summer Reese, if you wouldn't mind coming up to sort of substitute in accepting this award for Phil's wife. If I haven't embarrassed you too much, Summer. But Summer did great work with Larry Teeter, and she and I were part of a struggle to try to preserve his records from disappearing into the dust of history themselves. If you want to just come up, and then I'm going to read a little thing and then present the award. So you can stand over here, it's all right, or sit. Philip H. Melanson, Ph.D. We lost an indefatigable researcher and a good friend this year in Philip H. Melanson when he died of an incurable cancer on September the 18th at the age of 61. His death is a loss to his family, friends, and students, and to the assassination research community and the country as a whole. He was a Chancellor Professor of Political Science at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, had served as chair of the Political Science Department for 12 years. He'd also served as coordinator of the Robert F. Kennedy Assassination Archive, which is the world's largest collection on the subject. Phil Melanson had been a board member from the inception of the Coalition on Political Assassinations and was a regular speaker at our annual and regional conferences on three major assassinations in the 1960s, Dr. King and the Kennedy brothers. He brought a scholar's discipline, a hatred for secrecy, and a love for truth to our work. His brilliant analytical mind and meticulous dissection of government reports, investigations, and classified records led to discoveries about the real Lee Harvey Oswald and the Secret Service that is charged with protecting government officials and candidates for public office. His groundbreaking work on Lee Harvey Oswald's intelligence connections set a standard for others working in the case. His work on the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King brought him close to King's family, and he met with them over the years and helped persuade them to pursue the civil suit that exposed the conspiracy to kill Dr. King. Professor Melanson wrote a number of books and was internationally recognized as an expert on political violence and government secrecy. His published works relate to political assassinations, violence, governmental secrecy, and law enforcement and intelligence agencies. He appeared on NPR, BBC, CBS, and CNN news programs. He made a total of 95 Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests, which resulted in the release of 200,000 pages of federal government documents on topics relevant to his research. His published works also include analysis on the role of secrecy in public policy, Knowledge, Politics, and Public Policy, that was 1973, Political Science and Political Knowledge, 1975, Secrecy Wars, Privacy, National Security, and the Public's Right to Know, and that was 2002. On the assassinations, Spy Saga, Lee Harvey Oswald and U.S. Intelligence, the Robert F. Kennedy assassination, New Revelations on the Conspiracy and Cover-Up. Who Killed Robert Kennedy? Shadow Play, with co-author William Klaber, The Killing of Robert Kennedy, The Trial of Sirhan and the Failure of American Justice. The Assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr. Who Killed Martin Luther King? The Merkin Conspiracy, an inquiry into the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And on the Very Secret Service. The Secret Service, the hidden history of an enigmatic agency that he did along with Peter Stevens. And the Politics of Protection, the U.S. Secret Service in the Terrorist Age in 1984. We have in our midst, I fear, few like Phil Melanson, with both a burning desire for the truth and for social justice, as well as the skills and discipline to unearth real facts from the mounds of propaganda, fiction, and deliberate disinformation. Dr. Melanson's works did not speculate, they informed. Professor Melanson's attention to details and documents led to the Robert F. Kennedy Assassination Archive that is now housed in the University Library's special collection at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. This is the most complete compilation of materials relating to that murder. Established in 1984, the archives contain thousands of copies of government documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act public disclosure process, as well as manuscripts, photographs, audio tape interviews, videotapes, news clippings, and research notes compiled by journalists and other private citizens who have investigated discrepancies in this case. He was not a self-promoter. In fact, his humility spoke volumes and could teach us something about ourselves and our public presence. I recall many times offering him additional time on the agenda to speak, and he would suggest 5 minutes is sufficient. Phil also had a wonderful sense of humanity and of humor. I spent more hours on the phone with him than his family would have liked in animated conversation about political events and realities and the irony inherent in our work. Sadly, my own work schedule for Congressman McKinney and his increasing illness did not allow any recent contacts or discussions, and my emails and calls to invite him to this year's COPA gathering to speak went unanswered. Now I know why. The press tried to attack his character at times, calling him a conspiracy buff, but none of them dared to challenge or question his impeccable research. His stature and integrity and his commitment to discovering and speaking the truth led, as it has for many others in our circles, to his vilification, but never his repudiation. If there were more academics like him, more people willing to honestly and objectively compile and research modern historical assassination and political structures that both use them and make them possible, and to fight for transparency and against the secrecy that makes informed democratic decisions impossible, we might begin to approach the justice that, as Philip Marlowe, the fictional detective, says, is like a full and rising moon. The moon was cold and clear and crisp, like the justice we dream about but we never see. Many of us can taste it, though, and Phil Melanson was an epicure. I'm fond of quoting Dr. Martin Schatz in a letter to Vincent Salandria, reproduced in his important anthology of early JFK assassination research and response, History Will Not Absolve Us. It is so important to understand that one of the primary means of immobilizing the American people politically today is to hold them in a state of confusion in which anything can be believed but nothing can be known. And researcher Gaten Fonzie of the House Select Committee on Assassination staff wrote, "Today, most Americans believe there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, but they don't know it. They don't want to know it, and our government doesn't want to know it, and our elected representatives don't want to know it, because knowing it would mean having to do something about it." And that is an awesome thought. Phil Melanson believed it, knew it, and did something about it. His work, if taken seriously, should move all of us to do something about it, about the lies, about the failed investigations, about the continuing secrecy, and about making democracy work. Our Sylvia Maher Lifetime Achievement Award, named after a JFK assassination researcher whose work, Accessories After the Fact, set a standard for excellence in dissection of the Warren Report, is given in honor and recognition of the life and work of those among us who add to the work of others and inform the public of the truth. I'm sad that this must be presented posthumously, because Phil Melanson deserves so much more than our recognition and support, and deserved to know it while he was still among us. I am, however, glad and honored to be presenting this plaque to an archivist at the Robert F. Kennedy Assassination Archive, Pat Sikora, who's joined us instead of Phil's wife, who could not be here to accept. And the plaque reads, Coalition on Political Assassinations presents the Sylvia Maher Lifetime Achievement Award. And it's my typo, but I think it was perhaps a Freudian slip, 2005, because as I said, he deserved it, not posthumously, but when he was alive, in memory of Philip H. Melanson, PhD, in recognition of one who has always sought the truth. So, take this, Pat, thanks.
Well, like I say, I've known Phil for years. I've been at the university since 1976. Actually, he was there since 71. And I don't think there's much more that I can add. I know some people I spoke to last couple day or so didn't even know who Phil Melanson was, but now at least I think the way John presented him, people can certainly read some of his books and find out, what he was all about. And some of you, anybody who knew him will never forget him. His spirit's going to live on. And to us. Yeah, I have left 2 items. I have left 2 items on the table in the front. One of them describes what the RFK Archives is. and isn't. In fact, speaking of what it isn't, I got a phone call from the San Gabriel, I guess it's a journal or newspaper in San Gabriel.
Pasadena Weekly?
It's San Gabriel, and this guy called me and he said he insisted on finding out from me how the fact that RFK, in other words, how would the world be different if RFK was not assassinated? And I was saying, as the brochure that's on the table says, Phil Melanson basically was instrumental in bringing the collection to the university, but all it is the facts. We do not interpret the facts. This guy was looking for an interpretation of the facts. So if any of you want to jump in and give an interpretation, be my guest. I can find his name and tell you who to contact. But that's not what we're all about. We don't interpret the information, but certainly Phil was known all over the world. I mean, his impact. And yes, as I was talking to this gentleman who just spoke before, we had lunch together today. And, you know, people in his campus really, toward the end, he was actually no longer part of the political science department. He was part of the Center on Policy Study. Yeah, there are people in his people at the university, and I talk to them all the time, and believe me, I just try not to get embroiled in arguments with these people. But a lot of them thought, basically, yes, he was a crackpot. But, you know, it was just, and I actually met one attorney a few years ago, who was an attorney in Los Angeles, and Larry Tito sent me the tape on his interview on Guns and Butter, on that show, and I said to this attorney, you know, you might want to listen to what Larry has to say on this tape. He listened, but he still said, no, our government can do no wrong. I mean, he's an eloquent speaker, but so it's going to be a hard thing. But if we all persevere, and if hopefully somebody picks up the case and runs with it, we're going to see justice served, and that's what Phil Melanson would want to see. That's what Larry Tito would have wanted to see. I guess they're both going to be missed a lot. Anybody who knew him knows what I mean. Also, I left a form, one sheet on the table. What they're planning to do at the university is set up a scholarship fund in honor of Phil Melanson. And I left a sheet on the desk where you could send a check. If you want, of course, I'm going back to the university. It'll be forwarded to the foundation office. If any of you are interested in doing that while you're here, writing a check, whatever, I'll make sure I'll forward it to the university when I get there. That's the way they want to keep at least one way to keep his memory alive. So, thank you very much, and I'm sure that if Phil is up there, he appreciates what everybody said about him.
And I asked Summarise to come up and maybe give some comments about Larry Teeter, another person who worked in the Robert Kennedy case and knew Phil Melanson as well.
Hi, good evening. Yes, as Pat was just saying, Lawrence Teeter was Sirhan's defense attorney, and he passed away last year and was also a recipient of this award for his work in the Robert Kennedy case. And, Larry was very committed to bringing out the truth in that case and spent all of his time right up until the moment that he was in the hospital during his last few days alive concerned with seeing that Sirhan's case was continued and that he received legal representation and some alleviation in his current conditions. And I don't know if any of you are aware of that, but Sirhan has been held in solitary confinement since shortly after September 11th under the pretext that he had some foreknowledge of the events of September 11th, even though he's been in prison for well over 30 years. And it seems to be a widely held misconception amongst the law enforcement community that Sirhan is a Muslim Arab. In fact, the entire family are Christian Arabs. And so they basically made up a whole story about he had his head shaved and there was a television set in his room and that he was watching the events of 9/11, and used all of this to put him into solitary confinement and to create a very dangerous and hostile environment for him at Corcoran State Prison, where he's held amongst other inmates, thinking that he was a Muslim terrorist supporter of some fashion. And we're still dealing with that at this point. Larry, when he was ill with cancer, literally right up to the last moments, was just, talking about Sirhan's the many filings he had going on about Sirhan's case. There's still an active habeas corpus petition in the Los Angeles federal courts regarding the underlying conviction and the inadequacy of Sirhan's counsel and the destruction of evidence and the many things elaborated in Phil Melanson's work about Sirhan's case. We've been working on that since then with Larry's files, dealing with the state bar. There's been a tremendous amount of difficulty in dealing with all that. The state bar seems to have lost files, has sent other people's files to Sirhan's brother, has sent other people's files to me, and has files flying all over town. So we're in the process of perhaps preparing a motion to go to the court on Larry's files, because they have an order to destroy the rest of Larry's files by next year. And so we're alarmed that there may be things relevant to this case, as well as his other, he had many other clients. He was an environmental attorney as well as working for a decade on this case. And I know that Larry's also looking down from up there, and hopefully he's pleased that we're continuing with this work. We've been in some consultation with William Pepper on perhaps assisting in the case and coming out to California, since he's one of the few attorneys who has appropriate expertise dealing with a politically sensitive case like this, and he has expressed an interest in assisting Sirhan with his case. And so it's a long process of, I see the kind of work that Larry did in the volumes, the literally hundreds of boxes of files that he amassed and the filings that he made on Sirhan's behalf. And he literally dedicated a decade of his life pro bono, basically, to seeing that some justice was brought to this case, both for Sirhan as an individual, because I think sometimes in the political arena we lose sight of the individual humanity of people who are caught up in these scandalous activities of our government. And we can't bring Robert Kennedy back, but we still have Sirhan languishing in a prison in California for, a crime which he certainly, we don't believe was culpable in committing. If you read all of the documents in the case about, the mind programming and the various theories that Larry brought out in his filings, and you just look at the destruction of evidence and the absolute annihilation of a defense for him originally, he was completely railroaded. And Larry just dedicated all of his time and love and attention. And I know Phil Melanson and Pat Sikora was an invaluable resource for Larry. There's tons of records from Massachusetts that I've come across, in putting together, wrapping up Larry's legal practice. And, there was just a tremendous number of people who really put a lot of dedication into this case. And so I'm hoping and I'm hopeful. We've gotten some renewed interest by media people because of the release of this movie, Bobby, which I got to see at the premiere, a very trite and irrelevant film to the subject, because it doesn't go into anything about the assassination. It's about fictionalized characters that we don't have any reason to care about. But because of that, we've had some media coverage, and we're continuing to deal with some reporters from other countries. And, one can hope that the political tides will turn. We'll get some additional legal assistance and may be able to crack open some new things in the case. And the habeas corpus petition is still an active and ongoing thing. All of the work that Lawrence Teeter did has not been lost. It's still continuing as we seek legal counsel. The judge has been very decent in giving us continuances, because this isn't exactly an easy case to find a lawyer for. There aren't people knocking down the door to offer their services for free for the next few years to see if they can challenge history in the government. But we are encouraged by the people who have offered to help, and hopefully all the dedication of Mr. Melanson, of Lawrence Teeter, of Pat Sikora, and the many, many people who have helped in this case will continue, and we hope that we'll get Mr. Pepper to actually commit and come out and work on this case for us. And And at least for the time being, we'd like to see some improvement in Sirhan's conditions and a transfer to another prison where there hasn't been such an atmosphere of hostility created towards him, and then the underlying case issues can be addressed. So I'd just like to thank John for all of his wonderful work in keeping these issues alive for everyone and bringing people together to discuss what's going on in these various assassination cases, and for all of you for coming here and for caring and going back to where you are and continuing to work to bring out the truth in what our government has done. Thank you. Yes?
When you say they're keeping Sirhan in solitary, does that mean he can't have visits from his family?
Yes, he hasn't had any visits in the last 5 years, and Mr. Teeter stopped visiting him in 2003 because they were monitoring the attorney-client visit, so there was no attorney-client privilege at that point. And they're claiming now that they're willing to let him out of solitary, but they're not acknowledging the fact that he's in a dangerous and hostile environment. They want to put him back on the same cell block with the very same correctional officers who originally lied to put him into solitary confinement, and it's been documented by other prisoners that a hostile environment's been created in that prison. And all Mr. Teeter was asking for was to have him transferred to, he didn't ask for a specific prison. He listed more than one prison that would be acceptable, that had an appropriate
Isn't Corcoran for incorrigible violence?
Oh, they've got him on the same cell block with just truly horrendous people. Yes,
Well, what's the excuse for having him there in the first place?
I'm sure it's because this is a political assassination. You know, I mean, there's no excuse given as to why he's there. They say there's no other place that they can put him, which is patently untrue, and the prison officials are just dodging the fact. I mean, you have to realize the California prison system is just a dreadfully broken system. It's horribly dangerous. People are murdered regularly. The federal government has just come in and taken over the medical care system there because it's so over the top in terms of how bad it is. So from that perspective, Sirhan is just being victimized like many other prisoners in California. There are many prisoners who are victimized by how bad and how overcrowded and how violent the California prison system is. But yes, he's never had any kind of blemish on his record. He's had a perfect record the entire time he's been in prison. I mean, all of this is simply post 9/11 because he's an Arab and racism on the part of guards. I mean, I really don't think you can, attribute it to anything else but, racism and, a knee-jerk reaction. But he had done nothing to justify this, and they don't really give a justification as to why they, Corcoran, as opposed to someone else. They opposed Larry's motion to move him, stating that he was just trying to move him closer to his family. But he had given 2 different prisons, one of which was nowhere near his family, so it's kind of a dodge, So we're continuing to pursue that, and we've had some contacts from other attorneys who try to give us some encouragement on parole issues, that there have been some holdings in case law basically stating that a person can't be continuously denied parole based on their original crime if they'd otherwise be entitled to it. But we don't hold out great hope for, a parole hearing because the parole board's really kind of dead set about releasing him. So I think it's more about exposing the evidence to the light of day, and, maybe the government will come to a draw. Sirhan is a much older man now, and there's just no reason to keep him in prison. So whether or not I don't know that you can always prove the wrongdoing done, but you can sometimes bring out enough evidence to get people to, come to a truce. And I think that's, we're dealing with the first things first, which are his condition issues, which are just deplorable, and we're hoping to get an improvement in that so that he can have visitation again.
Speak to me. I know Jerry Brown. He's a new attorney general.
Yes, he is.
Speak to me.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, well, yes, the change of current administration in various levels gives one hope for something. So, okay, well, thank you all very much.
Well, I called the shuttle. They said he'd be here in about 20 minutes, take us back to the Adolphus. We'll try in close to 10 o'clock to have the showing of Randy Benson's, about a half an hour of raw footage from his upcoming film, and then commentary about what he's doing with the film and plans. And then we'll start in tomorrow morning upstairs in the back rooms on the second floor with the bulk of the conference presentations, about 9 till noon. And we have an archive section, and I don't know if I listed you there, Pat, in the list. I didn't mean to exclude you, but if you want to talk about the archive tomorrow. Okay. All right. And but we'll have other people talking about various archives of records. So thanks for everybody that came out tonight, and hope it was of interest, and try and keep the conference going. Most of the conference of import happens outside of these rooms. It's when everybody goes out and sits and eats together or talks and shares notes. But we have several other independent researchers that came this year and some that were invited and had to cancel at the last minute. But this is meant to be a researchers conference for us to share our material with each other. Thanks. If anybody wants to try to identify the people in the photo here, you can.
John, is the screening here? Where's the screening?
The screening is at the Hotel Lawrence.
Oh, okay.
And there's a shot